Hello and welcome to the conclusion of the DarkWing Rigging Project. Alright, if you made it this far, you've got a rig that's usable for posing. In fact, I've been referring to it as a pose rig because basically this rig is not as robust as one that you would use for animating. Especially if you've looked at other YouTube videos or seen other courses on rigging, you'll notice that we're missing a root bone. We never used poles. And in fact, let me touch on that right away because let's see, I should really get rid of the animation. So let me go into my graph editor real quick. No, let me use a dope sheet. I'm going to use a dope sheet, select everything, delete keyframes, go back to the 3D view. We scroll through, there's no more animation. Okay, select the entire mech. Alt G to clear the translation, Alt R to clear any rotations on these bones. And then I'm going to save this. So save as, this is part 5, or as I'm calling it, the conclusion. Alright, so now if we go into edit mode for these bones, you'll remember that this bone here, switch back into pose mode, and this bone here are what I'm calling containers. They contain over here in the constraints, they contain a IK constraint. So it starts with this bone and resolves an IK constraint. I never touched on that either, but basically this is bone number 1. This is the first one in the chain. So when I say chain length 3, I'm telling it to resolve the IK for this bone, the next bone 2, and the next bone 3 up the chain. Okay, so for example, if I change this to 2 and grab the IK controller, it only goes up 2 bones. This bone here and this bone here. So if I hit grab and I start to move it, we've lost the control over that third bone, which would be this one here. Now if I select my container and reset the chain to 3 again, I grab this controller, the IK controller for this leg, then it resolves the way we intended it to. Okay, that was the idea behind these bones. It just kind of creates a ground, and this is important when you're trying to move the hips and you want the feet to stay flat on the floor, or even if you want to do a jump. See? It looks like there's gravity involved, to be honest. It looks like that moving this, there's a solid ground. Okay, and you can see there's some funk going on the heels, but again, a more robust animation, we would deal with that. For this animation, for this rig that we're using as a posing rig, excuse me, I had to cough, clear my throat, so I muted the microphone for you. If we wanted to use this rig for something more complex animations, we'd have to rework that. But for posing, we can basically just grab, well, whatever we wanted to grab, like say we wanted to make this kind of a move, and then we can make these minor adjustments in here. We can go into front view, we can start grabbing these controls and, you know, adjusting them so that they're flat on the floor. Grab it along the Y, grab it along the Z. You get the idea. I mean, this just takes some, excuse me, this just takes some fine tuning as you go along, so it's not really worth it for something like this to try and create more IK chains and poles and whatever. But I was going to talk about the poles that we never did create, and I'm going to explain why we didn't create them. So let me clear the rotation, clear the translation. And normally for the leg here, let's go tab into edit mode. We're going to take this joint and extrude it out along the y-axis. Take this bone that we just created. Using Alt-P, we're going to clear the parent. Then we're going to grab it along the y-axis and move it out here. These would be used as pole targets. Okay, and they normally go opposite of the IK control. And what I mean by that is this IK control starts here, and then it works its way up the chain. and it resolves the IK for you. That's how it works. Okay? And then, like I said, bone 1, bone 2, all the way up here through bone 3. So it resolves all this for you. Okay? Now the pole would be used to basically, at the end of that first bone, what I'm calling the container bone, you would use the pole to kind of resolve the direction of this bone or the angle of this bone. It's basically a helper bone. It helps Blender to resolve the chain while still telling it, hey, I kind of want it to go in this direction. So I'll show you how that works. We take this bone. We're going to name it, of course, something logical, as in pole knee.l. I'm going to copy that, name the sister bone on the other side, pole knee.r, pole knee.l, pole knee.r. Alright. Then we're going to go back into pose mode. Now we have these two new bones, this one and this one. Let me hide my stage. Am I in? I'm not in textured view anyway. So hide that. Okay. So now this bone, we're going to tell it the pole target is contained in the armature. And we're going to tell it that it's the pole bone, pole knee.l. So now you see some freaky stuff just happened. Like, what in the world? I ruined my model, right? No, you didn't ruin the model. Don't panic. What happened is this bone, the IK container bone, it has a pole angle. This is where it will begin to resolve the IK constraint along the pole. Okay? So right now that angle, it's at 0, and 0 doesn't work for this model. So we can start kind of moving this around. You see that seems to be the wrong way because it's twisting the leg even further out of the way. So let's go back the other way. And this is usually 90 or negative 90 degree. It has something to do with the rotation of the bone to begin with. Maybe because we pulled it out of that bone, I don't know. But you can see it's easily resolved by changing the pole angle to negative 90. So let's set the pole. Before I do that, in fact, let me show you what the difference is. I'm not going to set the pole for the other leg, so we can have one with the pole and one without the pole. So now when I grab the IK control, let's say I grab it in, let's say I grab it and confine it to just the Y and Z axis. Okay. Yeah, I move this forward. Let's grab all of this. And let's move it. Let's move it here. This is where we want the foot. Alright? So now you can see that it's kind of jumbled up, losing its way. That's where the pole comes in. You can grab this pole and you can kind of use it to fine-tune the bone. So if I go back into front view, you can see that pole is selected. And I grab it. See, I can use it to fine-tune the bone. But the difference is the leg without the pole, when I'm moving that one around, just specifically for this model, what I had been doing was adjusting this hip bone, that hip joint. So that was acting as, you know, remember I was hitting R twice, and that was acting to resolve basically that angle, just by adjusting that. So for this to really work correctly, we're going to have to add another link to the chain so that it applies to that hip joint. So I'm going to pick my IK container and I'm going to change my chain length from 3 to 4. You see? Now when I grab my pole here and I move it, you can see how it can kind of straighten it out, really using the hip joint, you know, utilizing that hip joint. That's really the big difference. So I grab the pole along the X and adjust it, grab it along the Y and adjust it. I can grab it along the Z and make adjustments. And then it helps to resolve that. And it gives you a little bit more control, but just in a different way, really. Because the way we were doing it earlier with just using the hip bone, and in fact, let me get rid of the pole target here and just use the hip. Well, I have to turn my chain length down to 3 again. We can rotate the hip, see, and we can kind of resolve it so that these angles are all correct. Ignore the feet, because the feet right now are all over the place, but those again would be, you know, adjusted with some fine tuning. We'd move all of this up and make sure the foot was flat and so on and so forth. Okay? But this is just to show you how the poles work. Alright, so let's tab back into edit mode and get rid of these poles. Like I said, I really didn't need them for this exercise. Get rid of my grease pencil here. Okay, and let's talk about a root bone. Normally you'd want to be able to control the entire skeleton with just one bone. Okay, and I'll explain that now. We have the hip control here. I'm going to select all. Alt R to clear the rotations, Alt G to clear any translations. When I select the hip bone, it moves everything. Okay, basically. But it keeps the feet grounded. Alright? When I grab the waist, it's like I have a whole separate model. Okay? It's like now I have 2 models. But what would be nice is, and again, if we were doing a little bit more animating than we were posing, you'd want to be able to control the entire model with just one bone. So in other words, if I wanted to, let's say, flip this thing on its head, and I grab the hip and I hit R and I try to rotate it 180 degrees upside down, we get this. Looks like he's meditating. And that doesn't work for our purposes, especially if we wanted to flip this thing over. So we would have to select all and then rotate it. Oh, that didn't work either. See? It's because this bone here is separate from everything else, and it's not resolving. Now, if we took this waist bone and we turned on inherit rotation and then grab this and rotate it, turns, but still the legs are giving us problems. So we select all and hit rotate. Now that's more of what we were looking for. But I've enabled inherit rotation for this, so now every time I want to move the hips, it's going to move the upper body. We need a better solution. I'm going to turn off inherit rotation for the waist again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode, and we're going to create a controller bone for the entire mech. Okay, but first we need to attach basically this bone, the waist. We need to attach the waist to the hips. Okay. So we're going to need another bone. Now I'm going to switch to octahedral view mode. Octahedral. Octahedral. I don't know how you pronounce it, but you get the idea. The basic default view of the bones that show us the tail and the head, or the root of the bone. And we're going to copy this bone. This is the hips bone. So now I've made a copy of it, and it's called hips.001. I'm going to hit right click on my mouse to cancel the translation. And then on my keyboard, pressing Alt F basically flips the bone. Okay? So now we have hips and hips.001. So this is meant to be our what should we call it? Our base. Alright. So we're going to say this is the base bone. Let me think. Is there a better name for it? It's basically the control for the entire mech. Well, no, not really. It's not the control. It's just the root. Base is good. So now, if we take a look, I'm going to go into, no, I'm not. I'm going to turn off layer 1, and then I'm going to go into wireframe. Alright, we're looking at our skeleton now. If we look, these two bones are oriented correctly. What I mean, head to tail, head to tail, head to tail. This bone, which is our waist bone, right now it's controlling the whole mech, is kind of opposite of where it should be. Okay? So let's take our waist bone in edit mode, and we're going to parent it to our new base bone. So Control P, and since they are in the correct orientation towards each other, we're going to hit select connected. So now when I tab into pose mode, if I grab this base bone, it moves the waist. Okay? And if I grab the hip bone, it no longer controls the upper body. So what I need to do is go back into edit mode, and I need to take my hips and parent them to the base. Okay, so Control P, but this time I'm going to keep offset. If I hit connected, something would flip over because it would try to connect the head to the tail, and we don't want that. So we're going to have keep offset selected. Now when I tab into pose mode, if I grab the control bone, it moves everything. But if I grab the hips, it just moves the hips. So when I rotate the hips, it's still separate from the upper body. But if I wanted to move it all, I would grab this bone. And it moves as if I'm moving the hips, but without destroying the rotation. So basically what we've done is we've assigned the hips bone to control the rotations of the hips, and we've assigned the base bone to control what the hips were controlling before, as in the translation. Grabbing it and moving it around in the world space. Okay. Now we have the base bone, the hips, everything is attached where it's supposed to be. Let's clear the rotation and translation. Go back into edit mode, and now we need one controller to rule them all, because as you can see in pose mode, even though we can grab it, if we try and rotate this bone, the legs still act up. If we try to rotate the hip bone, the legs stay stuck to the ground. So we need something that will make the entire mech move, so that if we grabbed one bone and we hit R, it would do this. If we hit G, it would do this. Okay? That would be what traditionally we consider our root bone. And in fact, let me turn back the relationship lines on so we can see what's going on here and the different pose and edit modes of the bones. So we need a root bone. Let's create one. So let's go back into edit mode. We'll grab this joint. We're going to, should I turn on the model? Maybe that makes it easier to understand. We're going to extrude this joint along the y-axis. Okay, we're going to select that bone. Alt-P, clear the parent. And we are going to take that bone and we're going to bring it straight down. So we're going to grab it along the z-axis and lock it to the ground here, basically by telling the, or snapping the bone to this bone. So we have a bone in the middle. Alright, and it has no parents. If we grab it, see? The size of it is kind of irrelevant. I mean, just for the sake of illustration, we can grab the end of it, grab that along the y-axis, snap it to the end of the foot here, and grab the front of it. Grab it along the y-axis and snap it to this part here. And it's pretty much the same size as our mech. So that's our root bone. So let's call it root bone. Root bone. Okay, now we want this bone to basically control everything. Okay, so we want our base bone to parent to our root bone. Keep it offset. Excuse me. We want all our basic controllers. In fact, let me switch back to B bone view. Let me adjust my base bone, scale it just so it looks different than the hips. So I'm going to even grab the end of it and bring it down some. Okay, so now we can select our base bone a little easier in both pose and edit mode. This is basically just for rotation now. Okay. Here's our root bone. So now that we have our base bone parented to our root bone, in pose mode, if we grab our root bone, it's as if we grabbed our base bone. Okay? So we wanted to control all these separate controls. We want those parented to our root bone. So Control P, keep offset. And now in pose mode, when we grab our root bone, we can move the entire model. So if we wanted to rotate this model, I'll still have problems. I misparented something. Oh, you know what? Maybe I need to parent my hip bone separately to my root bone. Now let's try. Let's rotate. Oh, still. Something did not get resolved correctly. Let's solve this mystery. So, hip bone. Oh, I see what it is. I remember. Previously, when our waist bone was parented to our hips, we had turned off inherit rotation. So this is correct, what we had before, as far as the parenting. So let's see. We had the hips are parented to the base bone. That's correct. Okay. So now that the waist is parented to the base bone, we need to turn on inherit rotation. Okay? So when we go into pose mode, we still are able to rotate the hips, but if we try to rotate the base bone, it rotates the entire model, as if the hips and waist are locked together. So now, it should be that when we rotate the root bone, it rotates the entire model. But if we want to rotate the hips, we just rotate the hips. So it's important to make sure that inherit rotation is turned on for this waist bone now. And then we can rotate the waist separately. Still, like I said, this gives us better control. We can rotate this. We can rotate this. Our controls are complete. The only thing this is missing, besides the fact that I excluded the pole targets in favor of using these hip bones as controllers, is a foot control. And what I mean by that is, it would be better if we were able to grab this in pose mode, excuse me, and control the entire foot initially. Because you can see the toe and the heel are always trying to point to their controller bones. But ideally, we want to be able to control this foot as an entire assembly at times, or an entire component at times. So to do that, we're going to have to add another bone. So I'm just going to use this IK controller for the leg and duplicate it because it's already parented and everything. I'm going to constrain it to the Z-axis since I've grabbed it automatically by duplicating it. And I'm going to snap it to this bone so that they're pretty much level along the Z-axis. Let's see. And then I'm going to take that newly created bone and I'm going to grab it along the Y-axis and just kind of center it basically in between this heel bone and this toe bone. So now we have this new bone that's named IK leg L.001, but really it's control for the foot as a whole and .L because it's the left side. Copy that, paste it over here and change it to .r so that a sister bone is responding as she should. Okay. And now, basically, I want this to control the entire foot. So I want the heel and the toe parented to this new foot controller. Keep them offset. But I want the foot to move with the leg. So I'm going to parent the foot controller to the IK controller for the leg. And I'm going to keep it offset. Okay. Now when I go into pose mode, let's say I wanted to move this entire foot. Well, now I can. I have the ability to. What's nice about this is if I grab this and slide it along the y-axis, it keeps the foot flat on the floor for me. To a point, you know. I mean, you have to make sure you're not pressing the boundaries of your... I mean, you could add constraints to lock all this, but like I said in the other video, I like to have the a more liberal control over the lower body. And turn off these relationship lines again. So now when we grab this, let's say we want to turn them to the let's say rotate to along the z-axis, spin them around to face is left side. We can do that. We want to lift this foot up. We can grab it. We want to move the toes down. We can move this down. We can move this in, fine tune it. You get the idea. We can grab this up here. We can grab the entire foot and move it. Kind of get the look we're going for. We can rotate this and it'll spread them out and bring them closer. See, we have more control over it. We can rotate this bone. We can grab this bone and rotate it, spin them on his side. Put him on a hill or something. Okay, so let's select all of the bones in pose mode. Alt R to clear the rotation, Alt G to clear their translation, or you know, G is for grab, so Alt G to clear the grabbiness. And let me go back into edit mode. I'm going to change the size of these bones. Control Alt S to scale them. What should we make them look like? Or like squares? Yeah, that's good. And I'm actually going to, you know what, just real quick, I'm going to show you how to make a custom bone for this. And this is the only bone I'll use. So we don't have to go through the entire rig, but you'll see on other videos that there are like custom shapes for these bones. So let's deselect everything. I'm going to hit A to deselect. Then I'm going to hit Control A, Mesh. I'm going to add a circle. Let's scale it up to about, let's say about here. Let's isolate it in local view. Go to top view. Tab into edit mode. Let's take these two vertices. Duplicate those real quick. Extrude them. Let's extrude them again and then scale along the x-axis. Let's extrude them again along the y-axis. And then let's hit Alt-M to merge them at their center. Made an arrow. Okay, let's grab that, move it back a little. Let's grab all of this arrow, scale it down a little. Grab it, pull it back. Let's set our transform or our pivot point to be on the 3D cursor. Then we'll duplicate this, rotate it 90 degrees, enter, Shift R, Shift R. Let's take this circle, duplicate it, scale it down. There. Now we have basically a diagram of north, south, east, and west, forward, backward, whatever. Okay. So let's select our bone here. This is our root bone. And over here in the bone display panel, we're going to go under this display tab. And we're going to select custom shape, which we really should have named it first. Let's call it bone shape. So bone root. And let's go to this bone, the root bone, custom shape. We're going to look for bone root. There it is. Grab that. And you can see that that bone now looks like that shape. Okay, and oh, actually this is the shape. Let's move this out of the way. All right. Tab. The bone looks like the shape, but it disappeared because I didn't click wireframe. There we go. So now you can see it's there. Very oversized. I'm going to turn back on the layer where I had moved the actual object to. Tab into edit mode. Well, here, let me hit Control A and set the scale. Wow, it got even bigger. Is that right? We're going to tab, select all, scale it down to about right there. Then we're going to grab it and move it along the y-axis, kind of center this underneath the mech. A good spot for it. Grab it along the y. Try and center it on the grid, why don't we? Alright. Tab, let me hide that layer again where I had that object. And now when we grab our root bone, it looks like a directional. So we know if we grab it, it's going to move them around, basically. I mean, we can imply a rotation here as well. We go back into our original object. We zoom in there, tab. Let's grab this circle, Shift D, rotate along the Y 90 degrees, and then Shift D, rotate along the Z 90 degrees. Oh, it's still using the cursor as a pivot point. Let's set it to median. Now I want to rotate around the Z axis 90 degrees. And let's tab out. Let's go turn that layer off again. Now when we grab this bone, it kind of says, hey, you can move me around, or you can rotate me. Ah, the pivot point's off. Snap that to the cursor. Back into our original object. Tab, select all. Let's grab it along the y-axis, bring it to the middle again. Now let's try it. Can make it bigger. Tab, A to select all, scale it up. I mean, this is kind of obnoxiously big, but that's alright. It's just for illustration purposes. Now when we grab this and we rotate it, it looks like that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to translate, it's meant to rotate. Okay? Honestly, I would like it smaller, so. I mean, we can change this, or we can actually change the size of the bone. It's just easier to edit the object. Scale it down to about here. There we go. Hide that layer one last time. And now that looks like a controller bone. So it looks like we could rotate it. Front view, it looks like we can rotate it. We go on the top view, it's like, oh, I can move this thing around. In perspective view, it looks like I can do whatever I want. Hey, I can grab this along the everything but the z-axis, keep them on the floor, or I can rotate them around, let's say the y-axis. Alright, so I think that's pretty much it. Like I said before, I was hoping to build a nice posable rig for you, and I think we accomplished that in the first 4 parts. If you continue on here to the conclusion, you can see that we can make it a much more robust rig if you feel like going further with the setup on it. If you wanted to get into animating it, you'd still have to tweak it and do some, you know, make some other finer adjustments, stuff that we're not going to touch on here. I think there's probably a better way to resolve this heel, although I do like how it moves now with the foot controller, because it keeps the feet flat on the floor. So that's kind of nice. Makes the posing easier. But otherwise, this is the complete rig. You can get the model for free on BlendSwap. I'm gonna upload it to BlendSwap just as soon as I'm done with the editing the videos. After I've posted the videos on my YouTube channel, I'll post the model to BlendSwap. And let me know if you have any questions or comments. Post them in the YouTube comments. My next tutorial is going to be on how to build a mech, kind of backwards, but I wanted to do this one first because you hardly see any tutorials on more than just basic rigging, especially, you know, mechs that have their toes pointed out, or something like this that has 1, 2, 3, 4, basically 4 joints between the hips and the feet. So the next tutorial will be, I'm pretty sure it's going to be what we consider a light mech, a small, fast mech. And I'll go through modeling, and maybe I'll even rig that one too. We'll see. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching all the way through the series, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay. 3, 2, 1. What was I talking about? Okay, 3, 2, 1. I had to pause the recording and I don't remember what I was talking about. I'm gonna dance it off. This is not helping me remember. Okay, so